Today, I'm joined by Dr. Phil Zuckerman, a sociologist and professor of sociology and secular studies at Pitzer College in California. He's one of the leading scholars on secularization, nonreligion, and how people build meaningful and moral lives without religious belief. He is the author of several books, including Society Without God, Living the Secular Life, What It Means to Be Moral, and Beyond Doubt. He also founded Pitzer College's Secular Studies program. Dr. Phil Zuckerman, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, we met in Calgary a few months ago at the Weekend Reason Conference. We were both speakers there, and I asked you to sign this book, right? Living the Secular Life, right? But I enjoyed your talk so much that afterwards I went to get another one, Society Without God. So hopefully if we meet again, I can ask you to sign that one too.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Right. Again, thank you for joining me on the channel today. So I'd like to pick your brain about secularization in the Western world. But before we get into the broader topic, I'd like to begin with a more personal question to help set the stage. So you have spent much of your career studying secular people and secular societies. What first drew you to this topic, and what have you discovered that surprised you most?
Good question. I think growing up, I grew up in a pretty non-religious or secular milieu or area or nook. I don't know I don't want to call it society, but my world, my neighborhood, the school I went to, the kids I knew, there wasn't much religion. This was in a coastal neighborhood in Los Angeles. I was born in 1969, so during the 70s and 80s. I didn't know any, my friends didn't go to church. Nobody prayed at meal times. Religion just really wasn't that. We knew it existed, and we knew there were churches on Sunset Boulevard that you drove by, but we didn't really, it wasn't a big part of our lives at all. Except, the Jewish kids, myself included, would sometimes go to Hebrew school or get bar mitzvahs, but that was almost like an ethnic or cultural thing. It didn't really, none of them actually believed it. So we didn't have anybody like really believing in God. They just kind of went through the motions. You knew that some kids were Catholic, but they didn't go to mass. In other words, it was a very secular part of the world. When I first started to meet actual religious people, I was kind of stunned. I was like, my first girlfriend when I was 15, Michelle, her dad was an evangelical preacher who had come to LA from like Kansas or one of those, Kansas or Nebraska or something. And they were, that was his life. And they went to church and they invited me to church. And I was like, what? People actually believe this stuff? So I think I first was interested in just understanding religion. Like I was like, I thought it was something from the old days, like Salem witch trials or something. I didn't know anybody that it was really like a living part of their life. And so I was quite fascinated by trying to understand religion. And I spent a lot of my time studying the history of religion, reading all the, the Bible, the Quran, the Upanishads. Like I would read all the Book of Mormon. I would just read all this stuff. Anytime I met a religious person as I got older, I would ask them questions. So I ended up studying religion as my focus. And then as a young man, as early days of being a professor, it occurred to me, I started reading about secularization, and I realized that, no one was studying people like the people I grew up with. There was no academic home to study secular people, secular culture. How do they raise their kids? How do they deal with breast cancer? How do they deal with death? What do they do for fun? And so really I started to say, oh, wow, if the goal of the social sciences is to understand people and understand humans and why they do what they do and think what they think, no one was really addressing secular culture and secular people in a deliberate, concerted, rigorous way. And so that's when I started getting interested in what it means to be secular, what it means to be an atheist, a humanist, what secularism is, what secularization is. And that became my fascination. I guess it started 20 or 30 years ago. And I've been interested in it ever since.
Yeah, so the second part of the question was about what surprised you the most in this endeavor?
Well, that's a good question. And if I really could think about it, but what comes to the top of my head is how I think most secular people, or that is, most people that are not religious, being secular or non-religious is not a big part of their identity. They don't think about it a lot. They don't join any groups. They're not members of any, humanist associations. They certainly don't go to conferences like the one you and I went to. So I think people like you and me that are actively engaged in secular community are actually a minority. I would say probably less than 5% of non-religious people are actively non-religious in any political, social, or cultural sense. They're just living their lives without religion. And it's surprising to me how many times I meet non-religious people who don't even really think so much about their secular identity. And they even believe that morals come from religion. Even though they are moral people and they're non-religious, they never really think about the secular sources of the morality. They're just like, oh yeah, I guess religion teaches morals. That's fine. And it's like, actually, no, there are secular sources of a morality that precede religion and undergird religion. But so I think what always surprises me is that most secular people, being secular is not that big of a deal to them. They're not actively engaged in their secular identity or secular community. And they often take for granted some of the religious myths as true. They don't examine them that much. So that always surprises me.
Yeah, so in this book, I was just reading this in the last month in the Society Without God. You did mention that when you were doing the studies about engaging with interviews with secular people, you were surprised that people were reluctant to share their views on religion because for the most part, they don't think about it, exactly. Right? You even mentioned like a survey, like this church that wanted to have a like over the weekend retreat or something, inviting all the secular people to come telling us what you think about religion. And like very, very few people attended that retreat. So it was quite an interesting thing to note.
It's important to remember that that particular case is in Scandinavia. So, I mean, it's different in different areas. The Scandinavians are extremely indifferent to that degree. It's not the same necessarily everywhere. And there are people, if they were raised in strong religions and then they lost their faith, they tend to care much more about it. But the people that were raised with no religion, they really don't think about it. They don't care about it. It's just not, it's not a dragon that they want to slay. They just think it's whatever. They're indifferent to it.
So let's move on to the next question. What do you think is driving secularization in the West?
Yeah, there's probably not one thing. Just like crime rates, you can't pin it on one cause, or inequality, you can't pin it on one cause. There's cultural factors and political and economic and probably even geographical, and there's a host of issues. But when I look at the data, that there's some speculations that may be true, but we don't have a lot of evidence. And then there's some theories that have a lot of data backing them. So what I would argue is, if I had to think of what are the biggest causes for secularization, I would say these in some kind of order. So first of all, increased literacy. I mean, the more people can read and write, the more they're exposed to ideas that can challenge faith and spur doubt and free thinking and reason and rationality. The more scientifically literate people are, the more they can, again, it can spur more scientific thinking, critical thinking that is not necessarily conducive to religious faith, although sometimes they can exist together, but sometimes not. So as people become more educated, both in terms of reading and science and math, that can have an effect on creating secularization. Next, as there's greater religious diversity and people move to cities and they get exposed to more and more and more religions, that has a secularizing effect. When you live in a society and there's only one religion, it has a taken for granted, sacred canopy, to quote Peter Berger, feel. But when you live in a city and there's all these different religions, it can create a crisis of credibility for all of them, because you can suddenly stop and say, hey, well, they think they're right, and they think they're right, and they say they have the answer. They can't all be right. Maybe some of them are wrong. Maybe they're all wrong, right? Another factor is more women getting educated, and actually women getting in the paid labor force. So the more women get outside of domestic labor and are actually paid for their labor, that tends to have a secularizing effect. Women become less interested in religion. They have less time for religion, and they become less focused on raising their children and socializing them into religion. So those big factors, better educated population, more women working outside the paid labor force, greater diversity, religious, but also ethnic and racial. And also, of course, the internet has had a secularizing effect. We have a lot of data that the more time people spend on the internet, and I can break that down if you want. Then, of course, there are political backlashes. So a lot of people have reacted negatively against the Catholic pedophile priest scandal. A lot of people have reacted negatively against the Christian right and Christian nationalism, from Trump all the way back to Bush and Fox News that seems to embrace this kind of Christian nationalism. A lot of people are turned off by that. A lot of younger people have been turned off by the anti-gay rights aspect of religion. You know, many religions have been so anti-gay, and a lot of young Americans and Canadians just don't share that, and they see it as bigotry, and that's turned them off. So and I just recently saw another study that showed young people have been turned off of Christianity because of Trump. So those are, off the top of my head, some of the big factors.
It's interesting that you mentioned Trump and those the
Shane,
politics stuff.
I forgot a biggie, and then we'll come back to Trump. Sorry, I forgot the big one. The big one, of course, is when life gets more secure and when more people have housing and more people have healthcare and more people have a home to live in. When life gets more safe and secure, religion tends to go down as well. That's a biggie. That might be number one. I just didn't want to forget that. Okay, back to your question.
Yeah, because when I deconverted from Christianity first, and then my wife did, and she told me that the big reason was because of the Catholic Church, cases, the pedophilia, and Trump. So those are the two biggest reasons why she deconverted, and that's what you said. Right. So and the last one, which you said maybe the most important one, was something that I was going to share with you. Like, I have heard of this theory that's called existential security theory. So when people face hardship, insecurity, poverty, uncertainty, religion can become more psychologically and socially necessary. And it offers comfort, community, meaning, moral order, and hope for an eternal life or afterlife, right? Where present suffering is no longer there. But when we live in the societies where the basic needs are largely met, education, healthcare, social support, which are more reliable than prayer, religion may lose some of its appeal and urgency, right? So
exactly, and there's a lot of data. And that's not just in the West. I mean, that's global. That's universal. When life is more secure, safe, consistent, there's peace, things function well, the need for religion tends to go down. And like you said, and when life is precarious and difficult and finding food is hard and there's crime and disease and instability, people turn to religion. It makes a lot of sense.
So far we have been talking about facts about secularization. Now I'd like to, to get to the value judgment part. Do you think secularization is a good thing or not? And in what sense?
So my first question would be, yes, I do think secularization is a good thing overall. And I would say that because I could be wrong, I just don't think it's good to base decisions on things that aren't reality or aren't true or don't exist. So it seems to me that if a person is making personal decisions on an imaginary deity or angel, or economic decisions on an imaginary invisible devil or deity, or political decisions, I just don't think I think we need to stick to what we know and what we can know and do our best with the available evidence. And there's always going to be mysteries and there are always going to be things we don't know, but we need to stick to what we can know and what we do know and improve that over time with better methods and better science and better research, always keeping our conclusions tentative and with new data and so on and so forth. And beyond that, I don't think it's healthy to base anything on fairy tales, untruths, mystical legends and fantasies. It just seems like a house of cards. If you're going to base your life, your family, your society, your economy, your government on make-believe gods and goddesses and demons and heavens and hell, I just don't see how that's going to end well because they're not true. And so it's like a house of cards. So I do believe that if humans are not religious and they are rational in their decision making, they're empirical in their knowledge acquisition, and they focus on this world and this life, I think they will make the world a better place. They won't be waiting for heaven, but they'll say we need to have healthcare now, we need to alleviate suffering now, and we need to do it in a way that works. So in my maybe it's idealistic, but I think that if people stop believing in fantasies and fairy tales, they'll do a better job living in here and now. Now, that said, I also don't think secularization is always just some great panacea. I don't think just because religion goes away, everything will be great. No, there's still problems. We still have tribalism and nationalism and ethnocentrism and racism and sexism, and all the things that divide us up are not going to just automatically go away. I don't know if Stephen Miller, the Dr. Death of the Trump administration, the bald dude that's just evil, I don't know if he's religious. And he's certainly doing a lot of wicked shit out there. I mean, he co-opts religion, but he may not be a believer, and he still does horrible things. So it's not to say that, oh, the minute you're not religious, you suddenly become this moral or ethical person. And we also know historically, many regimes and dictatorships that have been atheistic or secular were not humanitarian at all. I mean, from the former Soviet Union to the communist regime in China or Vietnam or North Korea, like a lot of these regimes are anti-religious. And are not necessarily creating human rights and ethical and moral societies. So it's not a guarantee. But that said, when I study people and culture, I do find, on average, that secular people tend to be more moral and ethical in terms of wanting to alleviate suffering for others and other living things than their religious counterparts. It's not a one-to-one. There are many religious people that are highly moral and highly ethical and care about the suffering of others, including animals. And there are many secular people that don't give a shit about anything and they just want to make money and destroy the environment. But on the averages show a different picture. And what they show is that highly secularized cultures, like in Scandinavia, do the best at alleviating suffering, creating hope and opportunity for their citizens. And highly religious societies tend to be extremely patriarchal, stratified, miserable. Again, these are just correlations and there's a lot at play. But I ultimately generally think that secularization leads to better outcomes. It forces us to solve our own problems and not rely on magic. It forces us to have a live in the here and now mentality rather than a wait for heaven mentality. It allows us to question things like gender norms or racial dynamics that, the religious people think are set in stone by God, but we are able to deconstruct that and see what is rational and what's not. And so, yeah, I ultimately think it's a good thing, but I don't think it's like guaranteed. It's not like if we all became secular, then the whole world would be full of rainbows. And there's many aspects of secular culture that are problematic. So, I don't think it's the be all and end all. And maybe that's one of the differences actually between being secular and religious. I think religious people do think that their answer is the answer. Strongly religious people think if everybody just became a believing Mormon, or if everybody just became a Jehovah's Witness, or if everybody became Catholic, all would be well. Like the Lord, Jews, if everybody believed in the, accepted the Messiah, Jesus, if all Jews accepted Hashem and lit the candles on Friday night, the Messiah would come. But secular people, yes, we like our secularism, but we don't think it's the be all and end all. And we don't think it's going to save everything and save everybody. So we're a bit more humble in our claims and a bit more realistic.
So I was thinking about when it comes to moral claims, I think one of the advantages of secularism is that we try to base morality on what we can see, on what we can know, and it's evidence-based, while
Exactly.
in religion, they usually have this kind of divine command, right? So this is what God commands, so we follow the rules. Whether those rules will result in better society or not is actually the secondary, because the goal is to glorify God, to not sin against him. But in secularism, since we don't have that kind of baggage, we are more flexible. And when we are flexible, we can explore different ways of doing things that can lead to better practical, measurable, testable outcome, which we would like to enhance and improve. And the other side, of course, is that when we don't have that restraint, like external restraints or divine restraint on us, some people may try other things that leads to more chaos, more disorder, and more misery. And as we can see in some parts of the world, like Russia and China and North Korea, that's what it looks like. So I agree that it's not a guarantee, right? So there's always the trade-offs. But I agree with you that on average, it's better for humanity to be on the road of secularism. And it's also because we live in a pluralistic society, and
Mhm.
even any religion, it will have like some claims that will contradict other religions. So what do we do then?
Exactly.
They just fight each other, and like we have in the history, church history is full of blood and violence because there was no understanding of religious freedom. But in a secular society, we have the freedom to explore different ideas, theology, religion. People are free to believe those things. If we are the Western idea of secularism, right? We embrace those freedom of religion, freedom of practices.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So
So
important. Yeah, absolutely. We can talk about the just diversity and the importance of political secularism, where there's no one religion dominating or favored by the government. I did want to say a little bit, though, Sheng, about secularization and secularism. And, you mentioned North Korea, China, and Russia. We have to distinguish, secularization or religion becoming less significant can happen in multiple ways. So I always like to differentiate between like coercive secularization and organic secularization. It's the same thing with converting to religions. Like a religion can show up and say to the natives, accept our religion or we'll kill you. That's one way that's one way people get converted. Or they can set up hospitals and schools and say, hey, come check us out. Or they can go door to door. In other words, religion can spread by force or more organically. You take Buddhism. People just heard about it, heard the teachings, and thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. That makes a lot of the Four Noble Truths kind of ring true. The Eightfold Path looks interesting. Maybe I'll try Buddhist praxis. It's not like a Buddhist army came and said, if you don't become Buddhist, we're going to kill you, which did happen with a lot of religions, Catholicism, Islam, versions of Christianity. Okay, so the same thing with secularism and secularization. Secularization can happen organically, meaning it's not no one's forcing it. It's just people in their daily lives come to be non-religious, and they stop going to church, and they stop praying, and they stop believing, and they focus on this world and this life. Or it can be forced. So the Soviet Union had a policy to destroy religion and arrest religious people and torture religious people and force people to become atheists or at least pretend. North Korea, China, in China, there's only 5, official religions that are recognized. You're allowed to be in them, but then you can't be a member of the Communist Party. And if you're not a member of the Communist Party, that disadvantages you and your children or grandchildren in terms of opportunities. So we always have to remember, I'm not for forced secularization. I don't want to go around and, forcibly shut down religion and persecute religious people. I want people to have that freedom. I'm for the kind of secularization where people freely of their own volition come to no longer see the world through supernatural lenses and come to see hope in humanity rather than hope in a God to save us. That's the kind of secularization I want. And in those societies, that's where you see all the positive outcomes and correlations. In the societies where it's forced, no good. So I just want to stress that.
yes.
But as you spoke of the importance of diversity, that just gets to the heart of, how do we want to govern ourselves? If we live in countries with millions and millions of people and different religions or no religion at all, it's anti-democratic to pick one religion and favor that and have everybody's taxes support it and have the government enforce it. No. We have to. I think the First Amendment is brilliant. It says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. I don't know what it's like in Canada, but I think government shouldn't be in the business of establishing or supporting religion, nor should it be in the business of destroying or persecuting it. Stay neutral. To me, that's a secular ideal. And the funny thing is as Trump and his henchmen destroy that wall of separation, they're hurting Christianity too. Like, when Trump and his theo-fascists, the more they push Christianity, they're going to turn a lot of people away. It's not like, oh no, Christianity is becoming more ascendant. It's like, actually, you're turning people off because the branding is bad. So it's just like you said with your wife.
Yeah, I agree. On that Trump thing, like destroying people's faith, there's another side of the fact I think I would like to pick your brain on, which is that Gallup poll, let me just put it on the stage, has discovered that in the recent years, the percentage of young men who think that religion is very important in their lives have raised dramatically. It used to be around 20-something%, and then it rose to 42% among the people, men who were aged between 18 to 29. But for the female part, for the female young woman, it's about the same, about 30%. And the survey also found that the the increase was more dramatic in the conservative people. So I was wondering if you have any insights into that. Was it because that now the conservative side has more connection or they encourage more participation in religious activities, so we'll see that rise? Do you have any insight into that?
I mean, it's not my area of expertise, but so first of all, yes, everybody made a lot to do about this data. But if you look at other data points, like church attendance is still down, belief in God is still down, frequency of prayer is still down. So the actual practices of religion have not increased. But when you ask people, do they think it's important? Now, yes, more and more conservative young men will say yes. And I think that has to do with the Christian national patriarchal. There's a resurgence of men have it bad. We need to reassert our dominance. We need to reassert our white Christian Americanness. So I think it's part of that package. And that's often the case. Religion often enhances nationalism, enhances patriarchy. These things tend to go hand in hand across the world. In Russia, the most fervent nationalistic Russians are pro-religion. In Israel, the most fervent Zionists are pro-religion. In Peru, like wherever you go, nationalism, tribalism, militarism tend to increase along with religiosity. It's all part of that same tribal force and that tribal nature. So I believe when I look at this data, I think it's all those young white Christian men who are watching angry podcasts of angry Christian men who are asserting their dominance and saying, you need to be a man. And part of that is, you have to be on top of women, and you have to fight against DEI, and you have to have a gun, and religion's good, which is ironic because Christianity is a pro-peace religion that doesn't allow for violence. And yet the bloggers out there that I see, the Charlie Kirks and the inheritors of Charlie Kirk, and I don't even know all their names, but because I don't really watch them, but they tend to be like pro-militaristic, pro-white, pro-American, and pro-religion, because they see it all part of that tribal package. So that's how I would explain it. I think there's anxiety about the world with global warming, with AI, with changing gender norms, with changing racial dynamics and demographics. I think there's a certain percentage of white Christian working class men who feel their status threatened, who are scared about the world and scared about their place in the world. And so they cling to these tribal, nationalistic, ethnocentric, and religious dogmas and communities for a sense of comfort. It's not that unusual. I think it happens anywhere there's status insecurity and fear about the future and changes in society. People tend to cling towards these kinds of things.
And I think that's also one of the reasons why in ancient civilizations, religion was often used to keep the society together, right? If there's a tribe, there's a tribal god where people go around that. And Absolutely. If you fall, and so that's the way to keep the tribe together and the Absolutely. Society together.
It increases group cohesion, it increases tribe, and not just the belief, but the rituals and the symbols are key too. So not only do we all have the same belief, but we all have the same symbol, a mark that proves that that it's what they call creds. Like it's I'm showing you that I believe by this scar or this tattoo or this necklace. And we're going to do these rituals together, which again, increase group cohesion and solidarity. We're all going to do these movements together. We're all going to chant these same words together. It's just so social psychologically it's a very strong way to increase in-group solidarity and cohesion. Shared religion, the beliefs, but also the behaviors and the identity and the symbols, you bet. It's very similar again to nationalism. Like they're very similar. Nationalism has its sacred values, its sacred histories, its symbols, its rituals, its songs, its pledges. So these things tend to map onto each other very nicely, which is why secular people are the least nationalistic, least ethnocentric, and religious people tend to be the most nationalistic and the most ethnocentric. They're so similar.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. So let's move on to the next question. So from what I've read in your books, you have devoted considerable attention to challenging the Christian claim that secularism leads to chaos, immorality, and meaninglessness, which is ironic, given what we just talked about. You argue that secular people can live moral, meaningful, fulfilling lives without belief in God. But I sometimes wonder how much evidence actually changed this perception. Like many Christians do not seem to hold this belief because they have examined the evidence. It is built into their theological framework. Like they most believe that if they lose their religion, they are going to live a chaotic life, the life without meaning. I think it can also serve as a powerful way of keeping people within the faith. So if you leave God, you are told you will lose your goal, your morality, meaning, hope, and purpose. So as a result, even when the evidence shows that secular people are not morally corrupt or psychologically broken, the claim can simply be reformulated. Right? Now, atheists may be described as secretly depressed, hopeless, rebellious, or angry at God. For example, there's this popular Christian apologist called Gavin Ortland. He made a video, several videos actually, say that atheism is devastating, and that atheists who do not experience that devastating effect, they have failed to incorporate that implication of atheism fully into their lives. So like Jordan Peterson also says something along the same line, but in the morality sense. He suggests that people who call themselves atheists but behave morally, they're not really atheists.
Right.
So these claims for me sounds impossible to falsify. Right? If an atheist is miserable, that supposedly confirms the theory. But if an atheist is happy, moral, then we are told that the person is not living consistently with atheism. So how would you respond to this kind of argument?
I find it so weird and so ridiculous and so bizarre. I don't even know. I mean, all I can say is like, I don't believe in God. Like, sorry, like, I don't know how to prove that. I don't know how you want to go in my brain, and I don't know what you want me to say. I don't believe. Yeah, some atheists are depressed. Some atheists don't have a lot of meaning in their lives. Same with religious people. Some religious people are depressed and have a hard time finding meaning. So I don't know how you can prove if someone's really, what anybody really believes. Is someone really a believing Christian? How can you prove that? Is someone really a believe? I could say to a happy Christian, well, you think you're happy because of Jesus. I actually can prove that you're only happy because you have a nice family and you love your wife and you love your kids and you're happy because you have certain levels of chemical dopamine from bioevolution. I mean, why play that game? It's just so weird. Now, that said, I kind of understand. So, for example, when I meet a religious person who says they believe in God, they believe in Jesus, they believe in heaven, and then they cry when a loved one dies, I think, well, wait a minute. If you really believe in heaven and you really believe in God, why aren't you happy that your loved one's in heaven? So I kind of understand that. Like, in other words, I know people who think prayer works, but they still go to the doctor and they still have surgery. So if you really believe in prayer, why are you having surgery? Just pray to have your cancer healed. So I understand that notion of like, people can claim to believe something, but their actions speak differently. So if Mark Twain said, if people really were Christians, they would be crying at birth because they're like, oh no, another sinner has been born who's, violated, and they would be dancing and singing and happy at death because yay, now grandma's hugging Jesus. And clearly, since they don't, so I could say the same thing. I could say, all you Christians or Muslims, you're not really Muslim, you're not really Christian. I mean, I sometimes go to a Buddhist monastery because I like to meditate and I like to chant and I like to listen to the sound of the words. But sometimes when if the Shifu says like, well, there's no difference between space and emptiness and form and they're all the same thing, it's like, well, you built a mosque. I mean, you built a monastery. Why not just meditate out in the open? If there's no, clearly these walls, if you say these walls are all an illusion, well, you built it. Like, you can do that with any belief system. You can show the hypocrisies. You can show the, people who say they love animals, but do they really feel as bad when, I don't know. I guess I'm going on a tangent. So I don't think it's the weirdest thing to say. So, but when Jordan Peterson and these other people say, well, you're not really an atheist because you're moral, I would say, well, what do you mean by moral? To me, moral means I care about the suffering of others. It pains me to see someone else getting chopped up by a machete. It hurts me to see a chicken getting its face stepped on. Like, and I don't know why that is. Maybe it's just pure bioevolutionary. Maybe I just evolved a compassion towards the suffering of others because it helped people survive millions of years ago? And if we didn't evolve that capacity, we would have died out. I don't know the reason, but to me, I care about the suffering of others. I can't help it. It makes me feel bad to see other people suffering. I want to see, it makes me feel bad when people are treated unjustly. It makes me feel bad. I don't know what those feelings are. Are they psychological? Are they chemical? Are they bioevolutionary? But I know I have them, and they have nothing to do with belief in a God. So if Jordan Peterson wants to say, well, Phil, your moral compass proves you're not an atheist, I don't know how to, I'm like, whatever, call me what you want. I'm an atheist. If you want to call me a Christian, have fun. It's kind of like with gender, like people want to be called a gender, whatever. Identify your gender, fine. I don't, except if you want to be called this or that, that's your choice or your name or whatever. So but what I think it is, the only thing I would say is it's a little bit disrespectful because it's not granting people the right to define themselves and to define their worldview, and to just simply say, well, you're not really an atheist because you live a meaningful life. It's like, what a weird, then I would just say to them, you're not really a Christian because you wear clothes. Why not just pray to be warm? Why not just live in the body that God gave you? God has a plan. He didn't make you with clothes. Why are you wearing glasses? If you're really a believing Christian, clearly you're not a really believing Christian because you rely on science to improve your vision. But if you believe there was a God and he had a plan for you, then God's plan would be that you have bad eyesight. If you're really a believing Christian, why are you getting surgery for your, we could just play that game, but I don't see where it lands. It just seems to be hurtful, hostile, and disrespectful. But yeah, that's my best. And what I would say is, yes, there is some evidence that religious people are happier and less depressed. That's true. That doesn't make their God true. It doesn't mean that God is real. There can be other factors. So for example, every study I'm familiar with shows it's not the belief in God that is responsible, but it's the community that's responsible. When people are embedded in communities of like-minded people, they have these positive outcomes. They tend to live longer. They tend to be happier. They tend to have more meaning. It's the social dynamics at play. How do we know? Because believers who are not embedded in religious communities do not have those outcomes. Secular people and atheists who are embedded in these communities have the same outcomes. So we know, at least when I say we know, the evidence demonstrates that the aspect of religion that is responsible for these positive outcomes is the embeddedness in a community. That is what creates the happiness, the better marriages, the living longer and feeling more meaning. That's just what the data shows. And you can see that in the study called American Grace by Putnam and Campbell. There's many, many studies that show this. But at the end of the day, I wouldn't be surprised if atheists are a little bit more depressed than strong believers. If I thought I was going to win the lottery, I'd probably be really happy, even if it's not true. Like, I think I'm going to win the lottery. I'm going to be like, jumping in the streets like, yay, I won the lottery. And if someone said to me, well, where's your ticket? And I'm like, well, I don't have my ticket yet, but I know it's coming. So, and then the person who realizes like, no, I'm not going to win the lottery might be like, oh, that's too bad. Like, so living in reality is sometimes harder. That's why religion exists, because it's hard to live in reality. Reality is full of suffering and misery and depression and pain. And that's why being drunk is funner than being sober. That's why, but I prefer to live a sober, clear-eyed, in a realistic review and not accept stories or myths just because they might provide comfort for me. But if someone else gets comfort from it, that's their business.
That resonates with me so much because on my channel, I sometimes get comments from Christians saying that, why are you pushing atheism, or why are you trying to dismantle a Christian faith? Why are you taking faith away from Christians? You are making their life miserable. And they will talk about how belief in Jesus is good for your mental health. It gives you hope. It gives you meaning. I always respond by saying, but I care more about what is true, what is factual, right? Exactly. You can, if you give me a hope, but I cannot substantiate that, then what's the point?
Exactly.
But sometimes I would say to them, if you don't really care about truth, or you don't prioritize truth, right? If you prioritize comfort, hope, meaning as the primary goal, then sure, you believe in religion, any religion, right? So
I agree. And I agree with you. And I completely agree. It's like, if people are suffering and this provides comfort for them, okay. But I think it's better ultimately in the long run to live by what we know or can know. The mysteries leave as mysteries, and what is true and what is real. And I think in the end, that's a healthier way to live through life. But not everybody, clearly most people don't feel that way. Clearly they'd rather believe a myth or a fantasy than, but I do find that it's important to stress what we think is true and live an evidence-based life. I think is ultimately healthier.
You talk about how you have this drive in you to do good, to be kind to people. It could be from evolution or maybe from upbringing, from education.
Exactly.
But sometimes religious people would say that if there's no God watching over you, why do you still feel you're obligated? Or like, why do you feel that you need to follow that moral instincts or moral sense? Wouldn't you want to just go rob somebody or kill somebody, etc.? Well, how would you respond to that?
I would say that I don't want to live in a world where everybody just attacks each other and steals their shit. Like I don't want to live in a world where I have to fight over every meal, where I have to have a gun under my pillow at night because someone's going to take my stuff or eat me, or I don't want to live in that world. So it seems to me that a reasonable approach is we treat each other the way we want to be treated. That seems to work better than, oh, I'm not going to hurt you because I don't want to go to hell. That doesn't seem to really work. It never has. Maybe it keeps some people behaving a certain amount of times, but they always eventually, if you don't have empathy and compassion, and the only thing that keeps you from harming someone else is you think God's watching, you're a psychopath. And you're eventually going to like do something awful. Like I wouldn't trust someone who's like, I actually want to kill you. I would enjoy, pulling out your eyeballs. And the only reason I don't is because God watching. That to me is like, you're not safe to me. So where do I get my desire to be empathetic and compassion? I think it's bioevolutionarily. I think we as a species are a social species. And the only reason we succeeded was because our social instincts predominant. So yes, we do have selfish instincts, but if those were predominant, our species would have died out. We would have just eaten each other's shit and not cared for each other, and we would have died out. No problem. But the only reason Homo sapiens survived is because they developed empathy and compassion. So they helped each other when they were suffering. They fed each other if the person's teeth fell out. They helped each other. They wounded, they bound their legs if they broke a limb. Like other animals and species don't do that. When a squirrel breaks a leg, it's like, well, too bad, you're going to be eaten. But for millions of years, we have taken care of each other. And that's just an evolutionary biological trait that had positive outcomes. And it increased our survival, and it increased our reproductive success. So we have developed and evolved natural capacities to care about the suffering of others, especially if they are similar to us and close to us genetically or tribally. We developed a capacity to hate suffering and to feel sickened by suffering. And these are just natural bioevolutionary traits that, it's a bell curve. Not everybody has them. The psychopath doesn't. Some people have them in abundance. They can't bear to even think about suffering, but most of us are somewhere in the middle. And then how I was raised. So I was raised in a loving environment, more or less, where I was socialized to care about others, to be patient, to be fair, not perfect, but I was socialized in that, and I internalized those values. I see them in the broader culture. When I went to the dentist, I saw everybody waited their turn. They didn't just run in and say, fix my teeth. And then also, of course, as an infant, I was cared for by others for the first 2 years of life. And that primed me to understand about nurturing and caring, even in a deep sense that I don't even remember. But my first 2 years, someone else took care of me. I didn't take care of myself, so that I experienced what that means to be cared for, which enabled me to care for others in a certain capacity. And I also just know how it feels to be, I live life experience. I know what it feels like to be lied to. I know what it feels like to be cheated. I know what it feels like to be treated unfairly. Didn't like it. So, I want to live in a world where people aspire to treat each other better. We often fall short, clearly, but the predominant tendencies of human nature is to be social, work well with others, work in a group, to be mindful of others, to not want to see them hurt or suffering. And again, there's a bell curve. We don't all have those capacities to the same degree, just like we don't all have the same capacity for music or the same capacity to dance or the same capacity to do math. It's a range. But I strongly believe that our capacities for morality, meaning wanting to alleviate suffering and make a more just and fair world, are ingrained in us from our evolutionary past, how we were raised, the homes in which we were raised. I mean, you take a kid and you raise them in a violent, precarious home, their moral compass is going to be damaged. It's just a fact. We have the evidence. So you beat children, they're going to have a compromised moral compass as they grow up. Kids that don't have enough to eat, like all these things, our brains can be affected, the neurological wiring. You can get hit with a hammer and suddenly your ability to have empathy is gone. It is just gone. And you have no feeling for what other people are experiencing. So I think there's neurological factors, bioevolutionary factors, social factors, how we are raised, cultural factors, the norms and values of our society, and all of those get into us and help us be moral human beings, and some of us fall short. But to say that if you don't believe in a magical, invisible deity, nah, that's not where we get our morality. In fact, that view comes very late. Christianity has only existed, if you look at all of human history, Christianity has existed for the last 0.06% of time that humans have been on this planet, living together, building homes, meals, hunting, applying salves and yarrow root to injuries. Like, we've been around for at least 300,000 years as a species. Christianity showed up about 2,000 years ago. So how the can that be the source of our morality? What were we doing for 290,000 years? Living in cities, living in towns, navigating life, raising children. Come on, ridiculous.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. That's very passionate, and I totally agree with that.
Thank you, Shane.
But even okay, go ahead.
Well, unfortunately, I got to wind down. So maybe we do one more, and then I know it's immoral of me, but I do have to go.
Okay, so I'll just jump to the last question, right? So for people who are thinking of leaving religion, questioning faith, or try to live well without supernatural belief, what is the most important thing you want them to understand?
Take it slow. There's no rush. There's no hurry. Be true to yourself. If intellectual honesty is important to you, then pursue it. Read everything you can. Listen to both sides of any argument. Listen to both sides of any debate. And be kind to yourself. Be gentle to yourself. There are versions of religion that are less dogmatic. So it's not that all religions are the same in their dogmatism or their belief or their supernatural beliefs. You may be able to find a religious community that's less fundamentalist and more progressive and more metaphorical and not literal. There are also many, if you're missing the community, there are many humanist and secular communities out there that you can find on Google in your local town or community. But I would say, read a lot, watch a lot of movies, watch a lot of podcasts. The more educated you get, I think the better off you'll be no matter what. You may not be happier, but you'll be wiser, and for me, it's made me happier. Well, I was never religious, so I don't know what it was like to be religious. But I
can attest to that. I'm way happier now than when I was religious.
There you go, Shane. You'd be a good spokesperson for that. So, and I would say, enjoy nature, enjoy other people, enjoy creativity, enjoy the fruits of creativity, the arts, get involved in making the world a better place. You want to feel good. If you feel bad, find a cause, however important it is to you, and do what you can, even if it's just writing letters or emails or donating $5 a month, but find something that is meaningful to you and take steps to further that.
Thank you, Dr. Zuckerman. That was a fantastic interview. I hope we will have another one next coming months. But if you are listening to this podcast, get one of any of his books. That's great. I have 2 books, so I'm planning to get the 3rd one. Okay. But thank you again, and see you next time.
Thank you so much. Okay, bye-bye.